as cliche as it might sound, you got to operate from a place of passion. If you don't absolutely love what you're doing, if you opened a gym to make money, then you should probably close the door and open a Subway, because you just have to operate from a place of passion. It's palatable. I think, Andy, you even referenced it a minute ago of just, there's a vibe, there's a feel and a culture. I think that's the collection of, 15 to 20 people who absolutely love what they do. And that permeates to the kids, to the families. And if you want to be successful, I think you have to operate from that place of passion. So obviously we all got to, rent to pay and mortgages and all those things. But we say at our company, passion over paychecks. And if the passion's there, the paychecks will come. But we don't want to operate out of the reverse of that. Your paychecks make you happy. Well, you're bound to be disappointed, one of these days.
Hi, I'm Lauren Parsons.
And I'm Andy Jackson. And this is the ALWELLCO Podcast.
Dive deep with us as leading experts share their unique perspectives on topics such as recovery, sleep, movement, and the latest innovations in the space.
Hey, Brian, it's a real pleasure to have you on the ALWELLCO Podcast. And before we dive into your unique perspective, I wonder if you could just share with our audience how you met us, what brought you to the ALWELLCO community.
Yeah. So I own a sports performance company in Denver, Colorado, and our headquarters is in Greenwood Village. And I got to meet Andy in-house, visiting one of our tenants inside of our building, and kind of formed a relationship with him. And I think he was intrigued of what we were doing as a company, and, in development of athletes and the different, variations of people that we bring into our building, which kind of had some alignment with some of the things that he's doing. And so I think that led us to today, where we get to talk a little bit of, all things wellness.
Yeah, it's where I go for my neuro mapping, because Lauren started doing the neuro mapping as well. So it's that's really interesting, because it's fascinating, because often I get there early and I'm able to see what's going on, and there's all sorts of craziness going on there. So you're the founder of Kula Sports Performance.
That's right.
Can you just explain to people, what is it? What kind of athletes do you train?
Sure. Yeah, we started off as a sports performance company, really just into athletic development of athletes, kind of servicing, youth all the way up to professional athletes. We've grown our business to be, where we serve some adult population now. We have some memberships where, adults come in and use the equipment. We also have a High Rocks hybrid training environment where some of the more competitive adult athletes come in and train for High Rocks and different competitive, races and competitions. And that's been a really good value add to our deal, because now we feel like anybody that walks through the door, we can service. So, but the primary venture was, athletic development, speed development for athletes in any sports.
So Brian, yourself though, obviously it's called Kula Sports Performance. Come on, give me your background. Where are you from? How did you get into this field?
Sure. I'm kind of a legacy. My grandfather was a high school football coach. He was into weight training and stuff back in the 50s, before it was really popular. And then my dad followed in his footsteps as a coach, and really kind of fell into the National Strength and Conditioning Association, and really studied some of the Eastern European and Russian models of training. And so I kind of grew up in a gym. My dad, I helped him build the weight room at the high school he was at. And I just kind of grew up learning how to, I could hang clean when I was 7 years old.
Okay.
And then, I just never really saw a different path other than I'm going to go be a teacher and a coach like my grandfather and my dad was. And so after my college career, I got a job right out of college at Greeley West High School, where I was able to take over the track program and coach on the football team and run all the weights during the school day. And it started there in 1997. And then
you're never that old.
Well, I started when I was 5.
Right.
That's awesome.
So got, and then fast forward to 2021 at my, the third school that I had worked at, Valor Christian here in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, and kind of retired from the coaching educational side of what I was doing to start this business. And it was kind of COVID that really thrust us into business, which is ironic because it put a lot of people out of business. But there was a need, for athletes to want to train. And I had kind of been isolated to a school for a lot of years. So we opened that up to, whoever we could help. And here we are 5 years later in our new headquarters.
Yeah, that place is completely incredible. So basically your career is from your grandfather, from Charles Atlas to Brian Kula.
That's
where
much,
you're,
that's not right.
from.
Time span.
We might have to explain who Charles Atlas is, but look it up if you don't know who Charles Atlas is. I want to dive in a little bit into the business, because what really impressed me when I got there was just the equipment. You've got a running track in there. You've got so much space in there. So many people who would like to run their own business, open their own performance center, will be listening to this. Yeah. What advice would you give them, for building and financing a facility like yours? Let's just get into the nuts and bolts. That's, you've got the highest end techno gym equipment in there. You've got Kaiser in there. You've got all sorts of stuff in there. So what advice would you give them?
I think first off, you have to know what your culture and your vision, is for the facility itself. I think for us, being a speed priority company, we knew there were certain elements of a facility that we wanted to have. One of them being a running track, of at least 60 meters long, where we could do all of our maximum velocity work without having to go outside in a cold weather state. It's a necessity. The treadmills and the equipment that we picked, some of the Kaiser equipment, some of the techno gym equipment, was very strategic. And I think it probably took us 4 or 5 years in business to figure out exactly what we wanted and how that served our community best. Excuse me. How we flow our facility, how athletes utilize it, best. All that had been thought through. We probably made a few mistakes in our first couple facilities to get to this one now. And now we feel like we have a little bit of a blueprint of, this is how we would do it over and over again if given the opportunity. So to answer your question, I really think you got to almost start at the end and then work backwards of what do you want it to look like? How's it, how do you see your business serving athletes or clients? And then back into it. I bootstrapped this company by myself. We mortgaged our house to get it started for our first load of equipment. And then we worked our tail ends off, to try to continue to grow and scale. And, finally got to a place where we had, some capital to be able to expand into bigger buildings and nicer equipment. And that's where we're at today.
The other bit when I was chatting to you that fascinated me was that you've mentioned it already. You took some advantages after COVID. Our listeners would love to hear the 24-hour fitness story. It's such a cool story.
Well, COVID in general, really, right? Like I was coaching at Valor. We got told on a Thursday afternoon that we're being sent home and the kids had to go home. I never forget it. It was a day before a track meet. We had to send all the kids home. No one knew what was going on. And, we all sat around for about 3 or 4 weeks. And then, we were in constant communication with the athletes. And I had a couple of professional athletes I was working with at the time, Christian McCaffrey, Evan Bayless. And we continued to meet, at a park where we were, able to continue some level of training because the NFL didn't know what was going on either. They were still planning on going back to OTAs. And so through that, it kind of, I guess through the grapevine, people started hearing that we were doing some training at a park. And so more and more kids started to reach out and we just kind of kept, doing it, trying to stay within the rules best we could. We didn't follow them perfectly all the time. And then we found a local gym that was deemed essential because it had a medical component to it. And so we started operating in small groups out of there over the course of the summer. And as restrictions started to lift and we grew enough, then we got the 24-hour fitness building that had gone, out of business because of COVID. And we took the bottom part of that while another company took the top part. And we dove in with our first lease. I'll never forget it. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done in my life was sign that piece of paper. So, but it ended up being one of the best decisions of my life.
Yeah. So I've been lucky to see your facility as well, and it is really impressive. Yeah, Andy's not just blowing smoke. It's pretty impressive. You mentioned that speed is one of your foundational, maybe core principles. Can you talk about just your mission, your philosophy in general? I know speed's a part of it, but I know there's more to it of your philosophy and what sets you apart from other strength and conditioning programs out there.
Sure. I think for us, the culture of who we are is very important to us. And for us, it's about maximizing the athletic potential of every kid through the door or every adult through the door. We're not we don't promise Division I scholarships or, hey, if you come to us, you can play in the NFL or the NBA. We all know that that's a really small percentage, but for every kid that comes in, we have the ability to try to help them reach their own maximum potential. And I think every kid deserves that. And whether it's a, hot shot, all-state, big school basketball player, or it's just a kid that wants to be the very best version of themselves on a freshman soccer team, we get a chance to do that. And also to help mitigate injury and things that can be, really low points in an athlete's career. So that's really the mission and vision, is to try to help as many kids as possible in that realm of maximizing their potential. The speed priority component of it is there are different iterations of sports performance and, what you focus on and how you go about training athletes. My background's in track and field. So speed development is kind of what I grew up knowing, and, feel like I have a pretty good handle on how to execute. And so over the years, I just found that some of those training methods translated really well to other sports: hockey, swimming, golf, basketball, things that you wouldn't necessarily draw a parallel with. But we also know that sprinting stimulates the central nervous system higher than any other activity you can do. And so, my hunch was, if we do that with athletes, then they're going to change direction better. They'll accelerate better. They'll jump better. Their club head speed will improve in their golf game. So we've seen it affect and impact a lot of different athletes across a lot of different sports by applying that methodology to any athlete.
And is that methodology something that you think sets you apart? Is that kind of your bread and butter?
We hope it does. I mean, we think it does. It's funny because a lot of sports performance coaches will say they're a speed coach, and they do run, and they do things that would be similar things that what we do. We really try to dial in, ground interaction and how force production happens, and teach the athletes, take the time to teach mechanics. The lowest hanging fruit in training is the weight room. If an athlete gets stronger, then they're going to move better. They're going to be faster. We try to look a little beyond that and work through the mechanics and the efficiencies of sprinting, and then support those movements with strength training and power development and things like that. But those are, we think it's a little bit different, and it's been really fun to watch the industry change a little bit. It's not as much, weight room meathead, chase big numbers in the weight room. And people are starting to realize that, good movement patterns are actually what makes an athlete great anyway.
Yeah. I mentioned it already, some of the things that you get up to, and they're fascinating. And when I watch some of the athletes in there, you introduced me the other day to your up and coming Olympian. I think she's 800 and 1500, I think. We were chatting about times, etc. And behind me, Johnny, one of your trainers, was doing something nuts with some MMA or UFC fighter or whatever. I don't know what they were doing, but it was, impressive. And then at the same time, there was this young high school sprint athlete doing the most incredible things down the track. Is that my son and I were watching her going, holy, she's fast. It was incredible. So how do you adapt your training for all these different levels, from youth to professionals, and then, do it in such a way you're ensuring the progress translates directly to that performance in the field or court? How are you adapting for all of this?
Yep. I think master level coaches is huge, right? You have to have people that can decipher the difference between age and development and what's appropriate with the right progressions and regressions of different exercises. I would say that in a template of how we train, it's always going to be very similar, but obviously there's intensity levels and volume levels that, come into play. And so you just have to be good in that regard and able, but our good coaches are able to coach a 7-year-old and then turn around and coach a professional in the same, half an hour span of time. They just understand what that athlete needs. We still think that professional athlete needs exposure to high speed. We still think they need power development. They need exposure to strength levels, all the things that they need. And the 7-year-old needs it too. They just are going to get it in a lot different dosage, and we're not going to spinal load a 7-year-old and do, things that would potentially, inhibit, growth or stunting of any kind. So, I think a lot of it is just experience and at some level, common sense. Training doesn't need to be as complex, I think, as some people make it out to be. A lot of us are all out there doing very similar things. I've always referenced training as like cooking chili, right? Like everybody's cooking chili, but everybody's chili can taste different, look different, have different ingredients, maybe different amounts of certain ingredients. And so, not trying to be overly fancy for us, and just having a very consistent, simple approach leading to mastery of movement is really where we like to live.
So you're saying that even with young athletes versus seasoned professionals, there's not that much difference in terms of what you're doing with them. It's mainly intensity, it's speed, it's velocity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, at some level. I mean, there's a drastic. I mean, I probably gave you the worst, opposite ends of the spectrum of a professional athlete and a 7-year-old. Some of our younger population, our 5 to 8-year-old alpha groups, they're doing basic human movement, a lot of crawling, balancing, jumping, type movements. There's no weight load added to their programming. Once we get to like the youth and start to introduce a little bit of strength levels and movement patterns in the weight room and things like that, then at some level, we are still focused on speed development and proper, mechanics of sprinting, running, moving, change of direction that would mimic what a professional is doing. A professional is just going to do it at a much higher intensity, more volume, and more complexity within their training day.
You mentioned the word master trainer when we were chatting earlier. Where do you find them? If I wanted to open the Andy Performance Center, where am I going to get my coaches from?
He's not going to help you.
He's not going to help me. I know. Actually, he might.
Yeah,
he might.
He knows there's no competition.
Well, no, it'd be good because mine would be the slowest speed in the country, whereas his would be the fastest. So you'd have a comparison.
Sure.
If you want to be really slow, go to Andy's Performance Center.
They're just falling out of trees. There's master coaches all over the place. No, I'm joking. They're very, very hard to come by.
Yeah, I thought they would be.
There's a wide variety of athlete or of coaches that show up, that want to work. You got the young professional just coming out of, college, recent certifications. They don't have a lot of experience, but they have a lot of book knowledge. They're moldable. They can see maybe how to do things, but there's some unteaching to do there at some level. They think everything's very linear and, out of the book. Then you have others that maybe don't come from that background. I didn't come from a huge certification background. I coached for 30 years. I probably have a little bit more of the art of coaching versus all dialed in on the physiology, anatomy, things that go into structuring, programming, and training. I think the blend of the two is what makes a master coach a master coach. Have enough science knowledge and, training methodology to be dangerous, but then also have the art of coaching to know how to implement it, when to pull back and push on any one of those. I mean, one of the most often overlooked components of training and coaching in general, in my opinion, is the psychology behind coaching and the encouragement and relationships, the joy, the love, of the athlete, which helps propel them to, things they never thought they could do before. So that's another component of when we get our hands on a quote unquote master coach, they probably check the box of all three of those things. They have the science, they have the art of coaching, and they know how to be relational with the athlete. And those are hard to come by. So Andy, to answer your question, we try to grab coaches that have coached in a sport before potentially, because if they have experience leading athletes and being in a relationship and, know how to motivate, then we can teach some of the back end science and methodology and things like that we like them to do. I'd probably rather go that route than take somebody who doesn't know the art of coaching or how to connect with kids and, try to force all their knowledge into a session. So, we're usually trying to hunt for somebody that's got a little bit of experience leading, coaching, relational with kids.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm lucky because I get to just sit and watch, and I love just sitting watching, and I watch the interaction of the athletes, the kids, etc., with the coaches. They're just having a blast. The smiles on their faces, even when they're sitting waiting for the session and they're making too much noise when I'm supposed to be listening to my brain thing outside. They're having a great time out there. You've got thumping music on there, etc. They're just having a good time. I don't know how you've trained to, but I'm a big fan of being kind and polite.
Yeah.
They always say hi to me. They always high five me. They just are. That's what makes the center feel like it's got its own culture. So congratulations for that.
That gives me more pride than anything we've talked about. Because I think that's what we want to be, a family. We want to have a great culture. Training has to be fun, because training isn't always,
It's hard,
right? It's hard. And there's days when you don't want to do it. There's days when you're not performing at the level. So there's like constant disappointment sometimes. So your coach has to be, somebody that brings the joy to the session. And I'm really proud of who our people are and, what they're there for. None of them are there to become, multimillionaires. We know that, training in the performance world is a tough space to make money. But they're there because they love kids. They love to see progress. And, when I see a coach get more excited than the kid because they PR in a, fly 10, then that, they're loving what they do. So I think we have a bunch of people that love their jobs.
Doing something
Yeah,
right.
you do. So we have actually within the ALWELLCO community a bunch of speed guys, but we've got a bunch of people who are not. So what are your go-to techniques for actually improving speed? How do you balance absolute and functional strength and training power effectively? Let's get into the nuts and bolts a bit around speed.
Sure. That could be a 3-day seminar right there, that question. But there's obviously some different variations of speed. There's the acceleration component. There's the maximum velocity component. You have change of direction. So when we say speed as a generality, it's a pretty broad term that we break down within our training days of if we're working on an acceleration, type day, then we're going to work on more horizontal, longer ground contact type movements. It's a little bit more strength based and power based than an upright maximum velocity type movement. So all of our sessions are going to start with, your pretty typical temperature raise of the core, flexibility, kind of preparation, potentiation for the next movement. They typically align with what the theme of the day is going to be. So if it's an acceleration themed day, then there's going to be more horizontal velocity type work, 2-leg bounds for distance, things like that. And then lead into loaded accelerations where we're going to slow the body down to be able to see, mechanics at a better pace, kind of iron in some of the mechanics that we're looking for, which then ultimately we're going to do some testing. And you asked this question earlier about how do we know when an athlete's improving? We're very much data driven with all of our stuff when an athlete trains. So we're testing on almost a daily basis, whether it's taking a counter movement jump on a force plate or testing a fly 10 or a 0 to 10 for acceleration, for example. But we'll do that so that we kind of know, we potentiate the athlete up to that moment to test. It adds a level of gamification and gratification to see where they're at. A little competition in there is always healthy. And then that's about 30 minutes of a session. And then the back end is the power development component that supports whatever the theme was. So again, if it's a, kind of a slow ground contact acceleration type day, we might do a heavy trap bar deadlift on that day and contrast it with some sort of plyometric. Fill in the blank there. That's list is endless. It depends on who the athlete is, where they're at in their training cycle, what you're trying to accomplish. And then also, for us, the treadmill is a really nice tool for us to integrate in between the lift and the run, because we can reinforce some of the accelerative abilities that we worked on during the session. So we might put them on the treadmill for 3 to 5 minutes and do some, unmachined sled pushes on the treadmill or hill runs. We'll get our Z treads up to 25, 30 degrees and do like 6-second runs on them to reinforce that triple extension in the acceleration phase. So that's kind of a overview of acceleration. And then we'd go into maximum velocity, change of direction, but really the training days are all themed. So, it's not like you just go in and run fast every day, just in any direction. It's very much calculated of what are we working on? Is it acceleration, max velocity, or agility, change direction?
Yeah. Like you mentioned earlier, the simplicity of things, right? We tend to overcomplicate. And I can say for myself, I was a young athlete in college and I got into the really, nitty gritty technical piece. And I had a really nice coach that said to me one day, he said, "Lauren, if you want to be better at jumping, jump. Let's just get back to it."
Sure.
So I like that. Although there are, periodizations and you have programs and things, it's what's common sense, what's logical, and let's go with it. So that makes a lot of sense.
One of our themes is to not, as a trainer, your job is to not hurt the athlete. And not just physically, but, if you present, 25 new movements every week, then the athlete is never going to develop any kind of mastery of those movements. And so for the young developing athlete, I like to be pretty vanilla. We're going to stay and do these things the same every week, week in and week out, until we've developed a mastery of that. Now, when you're a professional athlete, you need a little different level of stimulus. Right. And so we will, find different ways to create, adaptation to different stimulus for the pro athlete.
Yeah. So on that, how do you structure training cycles for athletes when they're preparing for a season?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think there's about 400 variables there.
For sure.
For us, when a kid comes in to train, one of the things that we know to be true is that most kids are doing something outside of our space. So they're with their school, they're with their club, they're doing other things that we almost can't consider because we don't know everything they're doing. So we're going to typically try to operate in a kind of less is more, microdosing, movement patterns and things in where we're not creating, soreness and fatigue for an athlete who's probably going back to baseball practice the next day or lacrosse practice. But we can still move the needle because what they are doing outside of us might not be the CNS stimulation that we're providing by sprinting, testing, getting them on the specialized equipment that they're not getting. So we try to be in partnership with what they're doing outside of us without knowing what they're doing, outside of us. It's kind of it's a challenge. When you get a pro athlete like Kayla, for example, for me, I get to sit down and write her, whole year annual plan in blocks and segments and be very calculated with where we're headed. That's a completely different story than the 14-year-old that comes in for some speed work, where we pretty much plug them in. We're not going to necessarily consider too much if they're in or out of season because we're not going to do so much that it would hurt them if they had a game the next day. Which is really good because then it opens up more opportunities for the kids to train and get better.
Yeah. And, everyone has their own opinion on my next question that I'm going to give to you, but what specific strategies, because again, opinions, whether it's factual or not, everyone has their own thing, but what strategies for you are important during recovery and or injury prevention? Are there things that you're like, absolutely, everyone needs to do these?
Yeah.
Take it or leave it.
Yeah. Sleep. Yeah. Sleep's probably the number one thing at the, the highest ROI for young athletes is to get enough sleep.
And old athletes.
What's that?
And old athletes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think it's the best, right? It's the best supplement on the planet. Yeah. I think that probably the biggest thing with athletes is we don't know how to recover very well. We think that more is better. We're always in the work mode, load, intensity, things like that. So they don't know how to unwind. As we get into the higher level athletes, like I have some hockey players that I work with in the NHL who we've had start into some zone 2 rides after a game where they can start to flush the system a little faster than just going and sitting in the hotel room and waiting, till the next day to recover. So I do think it's a really wide range, but getting kids to not do something on a day is great rest and recovery. Especially if you have a highly motivated kid or a highly motivated parent of a kid who wants them in, we got 7 days on the calendar, so we can get 12 things in this week. That isn't always the best thing for the athlete. So getting actual rest and recovery and deloading the system, getting enough sleep, proper nutrition, I'm not one that I think a 15-year-old is going to follow a perfect diet plan, but if they can hit the big metrics of I get enough protein, I'm not eating too much sugar, I'm hydrated and not drinking, sodas and things like that, then I think you can really move the needle because that's it's a habit that we have here in the States for sure.
Just picking up on that recovery, when I've been in your facility, when you go into your locker room, that's quite an incredible place. You've got saunas and ice cold baths, etc. Is this all part of your recovery strategy?
Yeah, it is. We've tried to, build into the place the modalities that are needed to recover at the highest level. That's just not typically available for all the athletes. But for us, we provide the recovery zone, which has some compression and, concussive or percussive therapy type of modalities.
You've got Normatec in there, haven't you?
Yeah,
and you've got the hyper ice and all that type of stuff too. Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, nowadays there's lots of different theories and thoughts around cold plunging. And how long, and, do you contrast it and all the things, but we wanted to be able to at least provide, an infrared sauna for some of the detox and, anti-inflammation, and also the cold plunging. I think we have athletes use it in different ways. We got some people that, sit in that stinking cold tub for 12 minutes. I don't know how they do it. Some athletes contrast, and, some athletes believe that cold plunge doesn't work, so they just spend time in the sauna. And but yeah, we hope to give them, different things that they can try out that help them recover better.
We like your perspective. So come on, cold plunging, your perspective. What is it?
I personally don't love it. I mean, if I'm being totally honest, I spent a lot of time in a cold plunge in college. Being a decathlete, our coach would make us get in a deal after a track meet, and it wasn't a fun experience. So I think I have some trauma around, always having my foot in an ice tub or whatever. And so it's just, I do have to say it makes me feel pretty good when I get out, but I don't love the experience of it. Maybe I've just gotten mentally soft over the years. But so for me personally, I just don't utilize it very much. I much prefer the heat. I also have a metal ankle. And so when it's cold, it gets stiff. When it's hot, it actually moves a little better. So I tend to steer clear of the cold plunge. For the athletes, I really do think that there's a benefit to, the constriction of the blood vessels and moving fluid through the body better. I actually would probably recommend to contrast it versus just a cold plunge, so that you get some of that accelerated, discharge of some of that stuff through your body. And a lot of my NFL guys use a cold plunge, and some of my soccer girls use a cold plunge. So no judgment.
It's interesting. Looping all this together is that it's one of the ways I sleep. I've got this thing called a chili pad. Yeah. And I literally freeze my bed at night because I get this restless leg syndrome and stuff. So I don't know whether it has the same effect as a 12-minute cold plunge. I'm doing it for 8 hours.
Right.
Where it's cold. But I can't sleep. I can't sleep without it.
Well, it depends on the podcast of the week of whoever says, how long and what the temperature and, all the things. And
it's the trend at the moment, isn't it? The whole. Right. I was talking to the CEO of Vivo Barefoot, and we were chatting about it, and he said, well, it's the most ancient thing in the world is cold plunging. I said, but this is the sports and fitness industry. It's the trend at the moment. High protein is the trend at the moment. Let's see what happens in 2 or 3 years' time. It's it doesn't mean to say that it won't still be effective in a few years' time, but it's the trend.
Sure.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier when you were chatting about psychology and mental performance and athlete buy-in. So how are you incorporating mental conditioning into your programs? And, how are you getting the athletes to trust and stay motivated to your training methodology?
Sure. I think for us, we, as a coach, you have a level of kind of that psychology of the art of coaching, whatever you want to call it. We actually outsource some of our mental performance to an expert group. My sister actually runs a company called KSP Mental Performance, where if an athlete, beyond counseling, if an athlete's just struggling with performance anxiety or, confidence or things like that, then she's got, a video series and resources to help an athlete have the right tools in the toolbox to be able to deal with those things. And I think that's something that's probably equally, if not, as important as training at some level. You get this machine built of an athlete that can step up to the plate, but if they're nervous about, how they're going to perform, they may not be able to execute on it. So I'm a big fan of it. I think that, the old adage of suck it up, you're fine, is probably, passed us by. And so diving into some of those things can really help. And I know even some of our professional athletes have turned to, mental coaches and mental performance people to help them in their careers.
Yeah, we had Dave Phillips from TPI, the guy who looked after Mickelson, on the podcast. Yep. And one of the things that fascinated me, he said, Andy, I don't want you to focus for 5 hours when you're going around a goal. I want you to focus for the 2 to 3 seconds you're going to hit the ball.
Right.
He said, and that's all about mental training and performance. Getting them to think about those 2 or 3 seconds.
That's
fair. Go back to your coaches again. So what do you think is the most essential skills for a strength coach to master? And, what resources have been most influential in you helping them to shape their approach?
Boy, I actually think, and I've probably been more resolved about this the last few years of my career than ever before. And that's the ability to connect to an athlete, the ability to be kind of a compelling voice, somebody that, is admired and looked up to might be the most important coaching aspect. How do you learn how to do that? There's not many books you can read, I don't think, to do that. I think it's a trait that you develop over time, through practice, through failure, success. I think it's got to be modeled. So I think, what I'm very fortunate in my place is I have several master coaches that can model that trait really well to a young coach who's coming in with a bunch of knowledge, but lacks that ability, to maybe be that force. And I think it's got to be at some level mimicked and learned over time through, just being around and exposed to it.
Back to your 24-hour fitness story, there's another bit to this story that we were chatting about. Can you remind me the name of your coordinator of all your trainers? I've forgotten his name.
Aniran.
Mm-hmm. So I know Aniran, and you have got this model where you've taken over some of the daycares in 24-hour fitness.
That's right.
So one, can you tell us about that? But what I'm really interested in, how do you then go and manage and coach coaches who are in a different state, who are in different facilities? This is really something that I think a lot of people, when they're trying to do a franchise or they're trying to expand, I think it'd be really useful. So tell us the story about 24-hour fitness and the daycares, but then how do you get an Iron and how do you guys manage that?
Sure. Yeah. So we had an opportunity through actually a former athlete of mine to go in once COVID put their kids clubs out of business and take over some of those spaces. And we called it Speedtown Express. It's kind of a satellite version of what we do at headquarters. It's got a lot less weight training involved and a lot more, speed mechanics. And we have a couple of treadmills in there where we do some, speed development type stuff. We also satellite out of those facilities into the community to get out and do combine testing and force plate monitoring and things like that for bigger groups. So it's been a great model. We've had to, over the last year, kind of dip and dive and figure out, how it was going to work best. I think we're starting to figure that out now. Finding coaching coaches that aren't in-house is very difficult. I will tell you that. That's been a challenge. But we find, again, I think, when we first started hiring for coaches, we wanted to find the coach that had the experience. Like I was a track athlete. I coached track, whatever. And what we found was we needed somebody who could come in and really be that compelling figure that could create relationships that people wanted to come train with. And that's why I gave you the answer I did about, the coaching trait is that piece of relational, ability. It's also a model for us that has a lot more to do with sales than even coaching, right? There's a lot of, groundwork to be done to just get athletes into the building. It doesn't have the big presence like our headquarters. And so what we've tried to do is we have, onboardings. We often travel to the facility and have little training sessions for those coaches, so they can really be around some of our master coaches and myself and Aniran that kind of know the path, model and demonstrate to them what it's supposed to look like. And then we help those satellite locations with some corporate programming. So they don't have to, invent the wheel by themselves as a young coach. They can pull up our app and go through a 4 to 6 week periodization on an athlete that's coming in for the first time. And we have all of our treadmill protocols and all those things written, preemptively for them.
It seems a logical combination to add a business to a business.
Yeah.
And, if you look at fitness facilities, they've obviously got the traditional gym, they've got traditional offerings that they've got, but they're all now starting to look at other opportunities. So if I've got gym owners on here who are listening, people who have got physical therapy centers, etc., how easily would it be them to add a speed facility like yours to their facilities?
It's challenging. I'd be the first to tell you it's not the easy button. I do think trying to figure out in a gym situation how to monetize and scale outside of your four walls is important, because you can only put so many people into your fancy, expensive building. And so, looking at remote options, brand license deals, education, certification type stuff is really kind of where we focused our business over the last, 3 to 6 months. You kind of have to have a team of people, or at least a couple of really close confidants that you trust, if you're going to scale outside of your building, because then now you're starting to oversee things that you don't have direct impact on. And so I think that's a challenge. I think for me, it's not too tough if you're not worried about your high-end product output. But if you really want it to be an elite experience, the same as you have in your headquarters, then it becomes challenging, right? I mean, and it's not flipping hamburgers. So it's not like McDonald's where we can just create this, cookie cutter version, because the coaches are really the best part about, what we do. And it's really hard to replicate, an Iron. It's hard to replicate Johnny. It's hard to replicate Julie or Marcus or, all of our coaches. They're one of ones, and, we're really blessed to have them.
So if 24-Hour Fitness came to you, or Lifetime or Midtown, and they said, okay, we want a Speed Town Express in every one of our facilities, you're saying that sounds great, but that's a heck of a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah, I'd take that contract today there, big guy. If you can tee that up, that'd be great.
Which one do you want?
But we've actually thought a lot about that, because I think we do have some uniqueness to some of the protocols and things that we do, especially with our treadmill model, where we could make it a repeatable model inside, many different locations. Mm-hmm. You would just have to have a very robust onboarding protocols, maybe even some educational pieces put in place, which is what we've worked on, almost reverse engineering the Speed Town model of, we don't have enough information for our coaches to become excellent. So we better be able to get it to them. If we're the experts, then we got to get it on paper, on the app, on the, whatever, so that those coaches can grow into master coaches as well.
I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to tell you how to grow your business, but I'm about to tell you how to grow your business. Is that if you think about it, though, that's the most purposeful daycare that you could provide for one of these high-end facilities. That's what tennis is. So the tennis coaches do. It's what happens in golf clubs, etc. Right. It seems that the speed thing, my kids are no longer kids, so I'm not quite in that world anymore. But that would be certainly something I'd be looking at, instead of them just going into a daycare or being looked after, and they're doing something that's happening, helping them as an athlete. That makes complete sense, because your facility, though, you've done the reverse of this too. You're also bringing in, both Lauren and I come into your facility because we go and get our neuro brain training. I assume this is a model whereby you're bringing in other businesses to help. Is this a rental model? Is it transactional? How do these people work with you?
Yeah, some of the partners that we have in the facility are, I really consider them partners, not just tenants. Mm-hmm. Our physical therapy partner, our neurofeedback partner. We're passing clients and athletes back and forth. You hope to have a level of collaboration, especially with our physical therapy, because we get a lot of return to play athletes, or an athlete that gets injured that we refer to them. And then there's a layer of communication in the ecosystem of an athlete coming back. It's one of our biggest faults in the industry. The ortho doesn't talk to the physical therapist, doesn't talk to the trainer, doesn't talk to return to play. And so the athlete kind of gets passed off, and, it most of the time works out okay. But, think of a world where that athlete gets, perfect communication through that whole process.
Yeah. So Brian, let's wrap everything up. We're going to have a lot of coaches and trainers listening to this episode specifically. And I'm interested to hear what advice you'd give to them, whether it be tools and technologies, the mental aspect of things, so on and so forth. We could go on a long list of items here. Sure. But what advice would you give to them trying to make a meaningful impact, whether they're just starting out or they're seasoned? What should they be doing?
I think as cliche as it might sound, you got to operate from a place of passion. If you don't absolutely love what you're doing, if you opened a gym to make money, then you should probably close the door and open a Subway. Because, you just have to operate from a place of passion. It's palatable. I think, Andy, you even referenced it a minute ago of just, there's a vibe, there's a feel and a culture. I think that's the collection of, 15 to 20 people who absolutely love what they do. And that permeates to the kids, to the families. And, if you want to be successful, I think you have to operate from that place of passion. So, obviously we all got to, rent to pay and mortgages and all those things. But we say at our company, passion over paychecks. And if the passion's there, the paychecks will come. but we don't want to operate out of the reverse of that. Your paychecks make you happy. Well, you're bound to be disappointed, one of these days.
So you're lucky enough, Brian, you get to see what's going on in the industry. You're seeing lots of the experts, in the US and beyond. Is there one trend you see coming that you think is going to really, excite people?
Yeah, I think people are starting to stand up and learn that, the grind, the grit, that more mentality is starting to subside a little bit. People are starting to listen to their bodies and learn that, less is more. I would say that that's what I see as an overarching trend in our industry. It hasn't quite filtered down all the way into, high school settings and, stuff like that. But the private sector, I think the college sector, is starting to turn that direction.
Recovery. Yeah, I heard the other day that the Chiefs. So this will be going out after the Super Bowl is done. So bear with us. But the Chiefs played the Broncos, got hammered by the Broncos, and they couldn't get out because of the snow. And all the journalists said they wanted to go to the hotel and keep the Chiefs awake all night, so they couldn't recover to help the Broncos win the Super Bowl, which I thought was funny. Well, Brian, this has been absolutely fascinating, and and as we wrap up this conversation, we have something that's really close to our heart. The podcast, you've shown great strength today, incredible perspective. We're all about kindness. So, is there somebody that you embodies the values you've talked about, someone who's influenced, inspired you that you'd like to give a shout out to, please?
Boy, it would be my father, who's no longer with us. I lost him about 7 years ago. But he's kind of been the wind behind my sails, as we've, gone through different things. And I always feel like he's there, even though he's not here, when I'm, struggling. It's not as sexy as it always looks, from the inside. I had a great mentor one time tell me, it's never as good as it seems, and it's never as bad as it seems. And that's definitely the case as a business owner. But yeah, I think my dad would be a guy I'd love to just, continue to try to honor of the path that he kind of put before me and the inspiration to continue to do this.
Just quickly before you sign off, don't forget to visit network.allwellco.com and join our professional network. You'll get to enjoy exclusive benefits from brands we love and have access to a community where learning and professional development are always at the forefront of everything we do.